brings you a tale of a serpent's curse, a story buried beneath an ordinary home, waiting to breathe again. Now, step with me into the dark and listen closely. I remember the year the soil behind our house stopped feeling like soil. No season attached to it, no date. Just the weight of something watching us from beneath the porch, breathing through the gaps in the wooden planks. Before everything collapsed, there was only a simple rumor my father ignored, that old homes in the outskirts carry a serpent the way a shadow carries its shape. A quiet guardian, unbothered unless you disturb its sleep. He said he found it under the tool shed. A black curve of something older than the house, lying against the frost-dusted ground as if the cold no longer applied to it. I wasn't there. I only remember the sound. A blunt strike, then another. Metal hitting something softer than earth. The echo ran through the floorboards like a pulse. Even now, when the memory returns, it doesn't return as an image, only as a pressure at the back of my skull, steady, patient, waiting. My father never spoke about what he killed, but for weeks after, the ground under the porch expanded in tiny breaths, swelling, settling, swelling again, as though the dirt had lungs of its own. He said it was just the temperature, the house shifting, old wood adjusting, but temperature doesn't stare at you, and wood doesn't wait for the dark. I began noticing the house losing its balance first. Nothing dramatic, not yet. Just doors leaning open even when latched, floors slanting enough to roll pencils across the room, a faint hiss leaking through the vents when the night settled properly. And my father, the man who never forgot anything, started misplacing entire days. He would leave in the morning and return with mud on his shoes, clothes damp with a smell like cold stone, eyes scanning corners as if the walls had changed position. He didn't ask if anything felt strange. He simply watched the floor as though expecting it to rise again. Something had shifted inside him, but the house changed faster. Birds avoided the gutters. Wind slowed when it touched the windows, and every object with weight, keys, bowls, folded laundry, drifted a few inches from where we left them, as if nudged by fingers we couldn't see. No one said it, but all of us knew the moment the house stopped being ours. It was the evening the air in the hallway thickened, and the lights flickered with a rhythm that didn't match electricity. My mother froze first. She pressed her palm to the wall and whispered something without sound, as if the plaster itself were trembling. I hadn't yet understood what my father carried home that day under the tool shed. The shadow of a serpent without a body. A shape cut loose from the earth. A breath still moving even after the bones had gone still. But the house knew. Every room developed its own temperature. Some colder, some warmer, some waiting. The kitchen window stopped reflecting us correctly. The light bent. The angle warped. My face inside the glass came a fraction slower than mine. Not enough to accuse, just enough to notice. My father tried to distract himself with work, but his work began slipping through his hands. Clients disappeared mid-conversation, paperwork undone after he swore he finished it, money draining without record, as though a hole opened beneath our days and swallowed each one whole. He said the house was unlucky, but unlucky things don't breathe under your floor. I remember waking one night to a pressure on my chest. Not heavy, not painful, just present. As if a coil of something rested there, measuring my heartbeat. I didn't open my eyes. Fear wasn't involved. It was quieter than fear, more like acknowledgement. Something had moved into our routine and didn't need permission to do so. That winter, a crack formed along the living room wall. Long, thin, almost deliberate. My father tried plastering it, but every morning it reappeared, lower, slighter, creeping toward the floor with purpose. My mother stopped sleeping near the hallway after that. She claimed the air there smelled metallic, like old coins soaked in rainwater. But I smelled something else. Soil wet, living soil. Not the kind from gardens, but the kind from depths where things sleep for decades before deciding to rise. No one said the word curse. Not yet. We weren't a family that believed in curses, but belief doesn't prevent anything from happening. The first real break came the night the porch groaned, not from weight, from movement. A slow shift beneath the boards, like something stretching after a long rest. My father froze mid-step. On his face was an expression I'd never seen. Recognition. As if the sound confirmed something he had been hoping to deny. He stepped back. The noise followed. A long, dragging slide, a low vibration under the planks, and then a thud. Not loud, but final. He watched the porch like it could breathe again at any moment. After that night, the house began rejecting us. Lights died one by one. Water darkened briefly before running clear. The thermostat clicked at odd hours, as though a hand turned it from inside the walls. My father tried to fix everything at once, but the more he touched, the more the house resisted. Tools vanished. Screws loosened hours after he tightened them. And once, only once, I saw him jerk his hand back from the doorway, fingers trembling as though something had brushed them from the other side. He didn't speak. By spring, his voice had grown thin, as if something were draining it each night. Even his shadow looked paler. Something was unmaking him in the same slow, patient rhythm with which the house was unmaking itself. I did not understand the house at first. Not the way it watched, not the way it shifted its weight when no one walked through it, not the way the quiet grew thicker the longer we stayed inside. It took time and silence, before I realized the house did not behave like a place meant for people. It behaved like something alive. The earliest sign was the breathing. Not loud, never loud. Just a slow, rhythmic expansion in the floorboards, a faint lift under my feet, as though the ground beneath the house inhaled and paused before settling back into itself. My father dismissed it as temperature. My mother blamed old wood. But temperature does not keep its rhythm, and wood does not breathe. The air inside the corridor changed first. During the day it felt normal enough. Thin sunlight leaking through the narrow window near the stairs, dust drifting in slow spirals. But at night, the air gained weight. It pressed against the skin, gathered in pockets near the ceiling, hung in the corners as if waiting to drop. Sometimes I walked through the hallway and felt myself pass through something colder than the rest of the house. A band of air thin as a ribbon that left a metallic taste at the back of my tongue. The smell came next. A smell no window could chase out. Not rot, not mold, not anything the human mind could name quickly. It was soil. Soil pulled from a depth nothing human had ever dug. Thick and damp and older than the house itself. It crept through the vents at dawn, changing slightly each time, carrying a sharpness like wet stone and a faint trace of something reptilian, like cool scales pressed against the earth. My mother noticed it before I did. She paused in the hallway one morning, hand hovering above the wall, eyes narrowing as if something behind the plaster shifted its weight to avoid her touch. She said the house didn't sit right, that the angles were wrong, that the direction of the rooms contradicted one another, as though the architecture had been rearranged in sleep. She pointed to the hallway once and told me it felt longer than the day before, its far end darker, its corners angled just slightly off from the corners of real homes. I didn't understand what she meant until the morning I walked toward my room and realized the hallway bent in a direction it had never bent before, a shallow curve, just enough for my stomach to tighten before the shape returned to normal when I blinked. No one talked about it. Not then, not yet. The doors began to move on their own soon after, always slowly, always deliberately. Never slamming, never jumping from the hinges, just a soft push as if something exhaled against the wood, urging it wider. I watched my bedroom door drift open even when the window was shut and the air stood still. Sometimes it shut itself again, closing with a patience that felt stranger than violence. I told myself it was nothing. That houses creaked, that hinges bent, that drafts existed even in places that swore they had none. But the sound behind the walls left no room for lies. It began as a low hiss, barely audible, as if a thin seam of air moved through a tunnel in the plaster. But it wasn't air. Not the kind we breathe. It was too steady, too slow, too controlled. It was breathing. Breathing that did not belong to anything human. If I pressed my ear to the wall, the vibration carried into my jaw, a pulse that matched nothing inside my own body. Sometimes it sped up just slightly when I stood too close, as though whatever lived behind the drywall adjusted itself to the nearness of a stranger. The worst mornings were the ones when the smell changed. At 3 or 4 a.m., the entire house took on the scent of metal cooled by winter. Sharp, thin, bloodless. It mixed with the deeper smell of soil, forming a cold fog that seeped beneath the doors and collected at the foot of the beds. My father claimed not to notice, but I saw him pause in the hallway one dawn before work, his chest rising just barely, his pupils widening as though something brushed the inside of his skull. He went to work late that day. By the second month, the house had begun rearranging itself more openly. Nothing dramatic, nothing cinematic, just enough to make us question our own memory. A shoe left near the stairs would be found at the opposite end of the hall. The framed picture that normally hung straight leaned 1 degree to the left each morning. The rug shifted by inches, caught halfway beneath the door frame as if something dragged it while we slept. One night I walked through the corridor and felt the floor tilt. A slow, barely perceptible shift, as though the house were adjusting its posture to accommodate something heavy beneath it. The walls joined in soon after. They pulsed, a faint expansion like lungs filling. Once, when the house inhaled, the light in the hallway flickered in time with it, brightening when the walls stretched, dimming when they relaxed. My mother stopped turning her back to the corridor. She moved through the house sideways, one hand on the wall, as if keeping track of the boundary between her and whatever else lived there. She never said she was afraid, not once, but she avoided the hallway's center, always skirting the edges, always stepping lightly as though the wood might respond differently depending on where she stood. I understood her silence after the night the hallway shifted. I woke to a soft creak, a movement subtle enough that the bed barely vibrated. At first I thought it was the wind. Then I remembered the windows were closed. The air was still. The house shifted again. A slow roll from left to right, gentle but unmistakably deliberate. I sat up and watched shadows move along the ceiling. Not fast, not predatory, just drifting, as if the ceiling had risen an inch to let something pass between it and the attic floor. I held my breath and waited for the shape to define itself. It didn't. It only expanded and settled and stayed. In the morning, the hallway was shorter than it had been, a foot shorter. My father measured it. Twice. He laughed afterward, but not in a way that suggested humor. He laughed like someone who hoped the sound would cover the truth. By spring, the corridor no longer felt like a passage. It felt like a throat. The walls pressed inward ever so slightly, close enough that brushing against them left a chill on the skin like condensation on glass. I heard the breathing most clearly then, the inhale just beneath the floorboards, the pause that made the silence brittle, the exhale that rattled the plaster in a long, slow sigh. The doors responded to it. When the house inhaled, the doors pulled inward. When the house exhaled, they pushed outward as though responding to a tide. I never walked the corridor at night again. My mother said the house was trying to settle. But houses do not settle according to breath. Houses do not tilt their door frames to follow your movement. Houses do not listen. But this one did. It listened with patience, with hunger, with the steady calm of something buried so deeply beneath the structure that the walls had forgotten how to resist it. The night before we left the first house, I stood alone in the corridor. Not because I wanted to, but because the space had drawn me there with a cold, downward pull. Like gravity misaligned, the air was still, too still, The lights hummed once and then steadied. In that moment, I felt the floor rise beneath me, a slow, steady lift that matched the rhythm I had tried so long to ignore. The house inhaled. The shadows sharpened. And for the first time, I felt the corridor lean. Not forward, not backward, but toward me, as if the entire structure had bowed to examine what lived inside its walls that did not belong. I did not run. Running would have changed nothing. Running would only have acknowledged that the house had become something other than a home. It exhaled next. A long, patient breath that brushed the dust along the floor and stirred the air against my ankles like a thin tongue of wind. I stepped back once. Only once. The house followed. And that was when I understood. We weren't leaving because the house was failing. We were leaving because something beneath it had grown tired of waiting. It breathed again. A slow roll under the boards, pulling the shadow toward me in one long, deliberate sweep. The house exhaled again, and the hallway leaned closer. The second home was supposed to be a reset. Clean walls, unwarped floors, windows that faced the sun instead of the soil. A place untouched by whatever had been breathing under the porch of the old house. But even before we finished unpacking, the silence told me we had brought the wrong thing with us. The new hallway was shorter. The light was brighter, but the air carried a tension that didn't match the building's structure. Nothing visible, nothing physical. Just a tightness beneath the ribs, like someone standing behind us without making a sound. On the first night, I lay awake listening to the unfamiliar clicks of pipes and heaters. Normal sounds, ordinary sounds. But through the thin plaster, something else threaded its way in. A low hum, steady, patient, as if someone were whispering into the frame of the window. I pressed my ear to the glass. The sound was outside, but not above. Not on the street. It came from just below the sill, as if the dark itself had learned how to murmur. I told myself it was a trick, a leftover fear from the house we'd fled. But the hum returned every night at the same hour, a slow vibration with no source except the cold air pushing through the world where the building met the soil. The first unmistakable sign appeared on the 6th day. My mother opened the bedroom closet and froze. The door had been shut the night before, fully shut. Yet the inside of the door frame was covered in thin, deliberate scratches. Not random, not frantic. Just a line of small marks carved evenly from top to bottom, as though something inside had tested the wood with a single fingertip again and again and again. She said it was probably the movers, but the movers hadn't touched that door, and no human hand made scratches that shallow with that much patience. We tried to brush it off, pretend the house was normal, pretend we were normal, but the smell ruined the lie. It crept into the apartment one night with the smallest shift of wind, a scent sharp as burnt citrus, acidic and smoky, like fruit left too close to a flame. My mother smelled it first. She jerked her head up from the sink, eyes widening as if the scent had reminded her of something she'd forgotten. She feared. The smell drifted from room to room, trailing along the ceiling, settling in corners as though guided by a shape we still refused to acknowledge. The next morning, the smell was gone. Completely. But the heaviness it left behind never lifted. My father tried to deny it. He said the new place was fine, but the tremor in his hand when he held his coffee said otherwise. Within a week, the same things that had unmade us in the first house began threading themselves through our days again. My father woke exhausted, jaw clenched, eyes sunken as though he'd been grinding his teeth through dreams he couldn't remember. My mother lost her appetite. A few bites, and she would push the plate away with the distant stare of someone listening to a sound only she could hear. I tried to sleep early, tried to convince myself the corridor outside my room was just a corridor. But the nights dragged something back to me that the move had not shaken loose shadows that paused at the edge of vision. Cold drafts that moved without direction. the soft, rhythmic pressure of something shifting its weight inside the walls. It didn't breathe this time. Not loudly. Not like the first house. Instead, it watched. I felt it first in the moments between waking and sleep. A subtle awareness pressing the air near my shoulders, as if a shape stood just out of view waiting for my breathing to settle so it could match the rhythm one evening while the apartment was quiet and my parents were asleep. I heard the closet door shift. Not open, not close. Just adjust. Like a chest expanding with a shallow breath, I stared at it until the air thinned around me and the walls pulsed once, with a faint tension that felt too familiar to deny. The closet door stayed still, but the scratches inside looked deeper the next morning. The whispering outside the window changed too. The low hum grew sharper, gaining a faint, metallic resonance, like something dragging its breath against a cold surface. I tried to locate the source, street, vents, neighboring apartments, but the sound always returned to the same place, the small gap where the glass met the frame, as though the night pressed its mouth there and whispered into the room. My mother heard it on the 12th night. She pressed her palm to the glass and drew back immediately. The surface burned her skin, as if someone had held a candle flame to the other side of the window. The next morning, she said nothing, but her voice thinned as if the dream she refused to describe had followed her into waking. My father worsened faster. He misplaced things again. Keys, wallet, whole conversations. He stood in doorways longer than necessary, eyes unfocused, as though waiting for instructions from something behind the walls. He snapped at us once, not loudly, but with a tone I had never heard from him. A tone hollow enough to belong to someone still learning how to speak with a human mouth. By the second month, our routines disintegrated. We slept at uneven hours. We drifted through rooms without speaking. None of us used the hallway lights unless we had to. The burnt citrus smell returned on random nights, meaningless in its timing, absolute in its presence. Each time it spread through the apartment, my mother stopped moving completely. As if waiting to confirm a fear that required stillness, I asked her once if she thought it came from the vents. She shook her head harder than the question deserved. "It's not the vents," she whispered, then added nothing more. By the 3rd month, the dog refused to enter my room. He stood at the threshold, hackles raised, staring at a point above my bed where the air seemed to ripple like heat over asphalt. One night, while the building slept and the darkness pressed quietly against the windows, I woke to a faint, dragging sound beneath the bed. Not fast, not hesitant. Just a slow pull, as though fingertips traced the underside of the mattress. I didn't move. Fear would have been easier. Fear is loud, frantic, human. This was quieter. A recognition. A confirmation that the second house was repeating the first, not because the building was wrong, but because something else had moved with us. The sunlight outside our windows did nothing to fix the nights. The clean walls did nothing to fix the breathing space beneath our thoughts. The new floors did nothing to stop the heaviness from gathering beneath our beds. We were not living in a haunted home. We were living with something that had followed us from the moment the first house expelled us. The scratches in the closet deepened. The humming outside softened. The burnt smell drifted more frequently, clinging to our clothes as though testing the weight of what it intended to carry. And slowly, with a clarity that chilled more than the nights, I realized this was not about architecture or soil or the angle of the sun through the windows. It was not the house. It was us. Something had attached itself to the shape of our family, patient in its rhythm, deliberate in its presence, unconcerned with walls or distance or changes of address. It waited. It watched. It settled into the quiet between our breaths and learned the pattern of our days until the new home felt as heavy and as wrong as the first. And eventually, on a night when the hallway lights flickered for the first time since we moved in, I understood it completely. We had changed the house, but the night stayed the same. I don't remember the hour my uncle died. Only the temperature of the hallway when the call came. A drop so sudden it felt as though the walls had inhaled the winter outside and forgotten to release it. Death always carries its own weather. This one arrived with a stillness that pressed itself between our breaths as we prepared to leave the apartment. The funeral home sat on the edge of the city, a low square building with windows too narrow to let in much light. Inside, the air was thick, as if the rooms had been holding their breath long before we stepped into them. The lighting was soft, but not gentle. Dim bulbs cast a washed-out glow that made every surface appear slightly damp, as if touched by fog or by hands that had just been washed in cold, unlit water. The temperature never changed. Not when the doors opened, not when people entered or left. The air stayed exactly the same, a flat, unmoving chill that clung to skin like the residue of something ancient. The scent in the hallway was a blend I knew too well from the old house: soil, metal, and something faintly sweet, in a way that unsettled the lungs. It was not the smell of flowers. It was the smell of endings. My uncle lay in a room lit by two small lamps that made his skin look like paper pressed too close to the wick people whispered near the doorway, but the sound died quickly as if absorbed by the carpet. I stood there for a long time, not out of grief. Grief is loud, warm, human. This was quieter, a recognition, a sense that whatever had followed us into the second home had taken interest in something else now, someone else. During the final viewing, the air shifted, not by wind, not by movement, just a subtle tilt in pressure, as though the room leaned a fraction of a degree toward the casket. A single white moth, pale enough to appear colorless, slipped through the doorway and rested on the corner of the fabric near my uncle's still hand. No one else noticed, but I watched the thin wings tremble, even though there was no draft. The funeral ended before sunset. The sky stayed cloudless, yet looked strangely bruised, as if something unseen rested just behind the horizon. When we returned home, the apartment felt different. The air was too warm, then too cold, then still. I walked past my bedroom and saw the same white moth clinging to the upper frame of the door, its wings opening and closing with a rhythm almost identical to the breathing of the old house. I didn't touch it. I only stepped inside the room and waited for it to move. It didn't. Not until the light dimmed and the hallway behind me shifted in temperature again, a soft, sinking sensation like a figure settling into the walls. That night, while the apartment slept, I woke to the faint click of a hinge. My bedroom door was open by the width of a shadow. The room was quiet. Nothing moved, but I felt the pressure of another presence somewhere near the foot of the bed. Not watching, just occupying. When I exhaled, the door began to close slowly, smoothly, with the same patience I remembered from the first house. It did not slam. Doors that slam are influenced by wind. This one drifted shut as though guided by a hand with no need for haste. When it clicked into place, the air changed again. A faint scent spread through the room, a smell that had no business in a home where nothing was cooking, nothing burning, nothing alive enough to rot. It was the smell of bodies prepared for burial, a chemical sweetness layered over something organic and unmistakably final. I sat up, not out of fear, but out of understanding. Death had followed us home, but not my uncle's. Something older, something patient, something that knew our shape too well to stay behind. My mother woke sick the next morning, not with fever, but with exhaustion deep enough to hollow her eyes and bend her posture. My father's chest tightened without cause. He stood in the kitchen gripping the counter as if the apartment floor tilted slightly under his feet. Every symptom returned in silence. Aches, dizziness, pressure behind the eyes. Not as illness, but as reminders. Reminders that what moved through our nights in the first house had not simply followed. It had grown aware of the weakness within us. The same weakness death slips into when it chooses a body that is almost ready to collapse. By the third day after the funeral, I understood the pattern. The scent, the closing doors, the moth, the heaviness. It was not grief, not sorrow, not memory. It was death learning the shape of our rooms. And on the night I finally acknowledged it, when the hallway went silent and the white moth landed on my nightstand with no wind to carry it, I felt the air behind me shift, slow and deliberate. I didn't turn. I didn't speak. I only recognized the truth. Something had entered the room that didn't need an invitation and didn't plan to leave. Something had stepped into the room with me, and it stayed. I don't remember falling asleep. Only the slow cooling of the air and the weight of the blanket settling over my ribs like a quiet farewell. The apartment had been silent for hours. Not peaceful, just emptied, as if every corner had forgotten how to hold sound. Somewhere past midnight, I drifted into a shallow, heavy sleep that never let go of my senses completely, the kind of sleep where the body rests, but the mind paces quietly along the edges of darkness. That was when I heard the footsteps. Not running, not sneaking. Just a steady, barefoot rhythm like someone walking from the far end of the hallway to the threshold of my room. I didn't open my eyes. Something deeper than fear held me still. The footsteps stopped right beside the bed. A breath followed, sharp, deliberate, carving its way into the dark like something inhaling the room itself. I tried to move. A finger, a shoulder, anything. Nothing obeyed. My lungs tightened, reduced to short, shallow pulls that barely lifted my chest. The rest of my body lay under an invisible weight that pinned me to the mattress with the gentleness of something confident. It didn't need force. The breathing grew louder. Not human, not animal. Just a slow drag of air against a shape that stayed just out of my reach. My eyelids fluttered but refused to rise. The darkness behind them pulsed in time with the pressure on my chest. I don't know how long I stayed like that, held between waking and suffocation, before the presence shifted, not away, closer. A pressure gathered near my ankles, light at first, then deliberate, as though two small hands had placed themselves on the blanket and begun to climb. My ears rang, my breath shortened. The weight traveled up my legs in slow, uneven steps. When I finally forced my eyes open, the room revealed itself in pieces, the ceiling, the window, the faint outline of my dresser, all drenched in a cold that had no source, and then the figures at the foot of my bed, 2 of them. They didn't move at first. They didn't need to. They simply existed with a clarity that felt older than the apartment itself. The one on the left was a girl. Hair parted into 2 uneven braids that hung stiffly as though they'd been wet and left to dry in the dark. Her posture was wrong. Shoulders pulled too far forward, chin lowered as if listening for something beneath the floor. The second figure stood beside her, taller, broader, wearing a cracked leather jacket that caught what little light the room offered. His head tilted slightly to the side, as though the bones of his neck no longer agreed with gravity. Neither had a face, not blurred. Absent. A soft void where features should have been, like skin stretched too tightly over something that had not decided how to appear. The pressure tightened around my throat. Not choking, just holding. The girl moved first. Her head lifted, slow and mechanical, as if pulled upward by a string tied to the ceiling. She leaned closer, braids swinging gently, until the ends brushed the blanket near my knees. The man stepped forward, one boot, then the other. The floor didn't creak. The shadows didn't shift. He simply appeared closer with each blink I failed to complete. I tried to scream. Only my heartbeat answered. The girl lifted a hand, small, cold, sharp in its stillness. She reached toward my leg with the curiosity of something inspecting prey. When her fingers touched the blanket, the air in the room dropped below breath temperature. My skin tightened. My vision dimmed. Then the man leaned forward and placed his palm on the edge of the mattress. The bed dipped, not under weight, but under intention. I felt the movement under my ribs, a silent question from something that had waited for this exact moment. He reached toward my face. I couldn't close my eyes. The paralysis held me open like a witness. His hand rose slowly, fingers stiff, as though remembering the shape of a gesture once human. The girl watched, her empty face angled upward as if learning. When his hand touched my cheek, the cold traveled through my teeth and into my skull. Then he slapped me. Not hard, not violently, just a sharp, deliberate strike meant to confirm that I belonged to this moment and nowhere else. The room flashed. Sound returned. My limbs unlocked as if a cord had been cut. I gasped. A raw, desperate breath that tore itself into the air. Both figures vanished. Not dissolved, not hidden, just gone, leaving the impression of weight still lingering on the corner of the mattress. The room changed instantly. The temperature rose in a quick, unnatural surge, as if something had rushed out through the walls. I lay there shaking, watching the corner of the room where the light didn't reach. Something crouched there. A silhouette bent forward, elbows on its knees, head turned slightly as if examining the space the two figures had left behind. It wasn't solid. It wasn't smoke. It wasn't shadow. It was simply present. A shape that had no desire to introduce itself because it already knew this room belonged to it. My cheek stung. My chest shuddered. The air trembled with the same burnt citrus scent that had followed us through every house. And in that trembling silence came a truth that did not require words. The curse had outgrown the soil beneath our first home, outgrown the house, outgrown the walls and the ceilings and the vents and the closets. It had learned us, individually, by name, by breath. It had chosen its next host, and the moment I touched my cheek and felt the lingering cold from the man's hand, I knew. And for the first time, I knew the curse wasn't my father's anymore.